Connect, live, laugh, and love. Connections, dreams, getaway experiences. Brave Heart Workshops. Unique Getaways live with Jill Reynolds.
The Connection Show, Restore, Renew, and Reconnect in Community, sponsored by Brave Heart Workshops, live with Jill Reynolds. And joining me today is my good friend from California, Tim Harrington. Welcome, Tim.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
Great. We're both at the beach, so we wanted to bring you sunshine from around the globe. And what I'd love to share with our audience today is a little bit about Tim Harrington's bio. So he is the founder and chief inspiration officer of Family Addiction Recovery Mentorship Services, Sustainable Recovery Renovation Services, LaunchPad Discover Your Purpose Services, and the co-founder of Wide Wonder ZERO Stigma Education. He's persistent and outspoken voice in the field of mental and emotional health advocacy, addiction treatment, and recovery. He is an active participant in the movement to reduce social stigmas related to substance abuse disorders, as well as emotional and mental health injury. The goal of his most important role as co-founder of Wide Wonder is to create the first zero stigma city in America. His professional mission as an addiction recovery coach, renoventionist, and he'll fix that, and family recovery support specialist is to meet family members, parents with a struggling loved one exactly where they are and attend to their needs. He does this with a personalized and comprehensive strategy that includes modern, comprehensive family recovery education, training, and ongoing support. And he's married to an amazing woman. So
that's true.
This is Tim Harrington. So what an amazing bio, Tim. And I don't know how you can do all of this in one day.
Thankfully it's not all. Well, some days it can be all in one day, but mostly not. Thankful for that. What's interesting about all those things is that there is a common thread through all of them, and that is just the notion of living your life in your high values. And that's the connective tissue. Speaking of connection, that's the connective tissue around everything that I do. It's about living in your high values. And that would be, for me, would be family. That would be being in a family, being a part of a family, leading a family. That's really everything for me. That's my highest value.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I too am in recovery and actually went to treatment too for codependency, and I'm a big Melody Beattie fan, and one thing and I actually met Sharon Wegscheider Cruz in the 70s when she owned Onsite, believe it or not, and I created through the years my definition of codependency, and it's when we allow people, places, or things to become more important than ourselves that we lose our identity. And so over the years, I've learned from my own codependent recovery to put God first, your higher power first, self second, and family third, and business fourth. And I had to do that in order to balance my life, because I had it so mixed up where I was putting everyone else, my son, my family, everyone else first, and forgot me and forgot God. So that was my way that I've created connection with family, by doing it in that order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with your businesses, if we can break them down a bit, share a little bit about each one that you do and what that represents, so that the audience is better informed and knows who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I had about a 16, 17-year relationship with a couple of drugs of solution, I call them. And at the end of that relationship, when I it's important to know that I never knew I was going to completely break up. I just knew I needed a break. And that was typical of my process, was that we would break up and then we'd get back together and break up and get back together. It's a fairly common narrative. And what I didn't know 19 years ago this past April was that I was going to never go back to those drugs of solution. And what happened to me was that somebody said in a 12-step meeting one day, as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, they said, you should work in treatment. And I still haven't decided whether that was an insult or a compliment. But what happened was that with no other real prospects, a couple of failed attempts at different jobs in entertainment and back in the restaurant business, which is the last thing that I had before I got into recovery. I owned a restaurant, and so I did it. I got a job at a residential treatment center in California, and I worked there for a while, and I eventually became what's known as the sober companion. It has another names as well, but basically I lived with people in transition from treatment back to the real world who had necessarily high stress jobs to return to. I toured with musicians, I worked with actors, I worked with high-powered attorneys and executives, and I would live with them 24 hours a day for an extended period of time as they reintegrated into their lives post-treatment. Out of that, what I learned, which would later become the incarnation of sustainable recovery and family addiction recovery services, is this notion of that addiction doesn't come in bottles and cans and syringes and everything else. It comes in systems. And I was embedded in those systems, and I could very clearly see where the dysfunction was and what caused people to stay in certain cycles of dysfunction. And that was in relationship with other people. And we triggered each other. We do these things that cause us necessarily more pain, continue to trigger old pains, and that keeps us in this cycle of having a relationship with drugs of solution because it mitigates the pain, distracts from the pain. And so sustainable recovery was born when I stopped touring with these people or living with these people because I had kids and I didn't want to be gone for extended periods of time. I had my first child, and it was very difficult to have that relationship over Skype at the time. And that became very hard for me and stressful for my wife. And so I transitioned out of that into what I called sustainable recovery, because what I became interested in through my own story and then working with these people in an intense level as sort of an embedded journalist, if you will, was what was sustainable for any one system that kept them moving forward towards what they would define as their recovery, being measured by standard of living, different dimensions of health, not just being sober. And that became my quest, was to be a custodian of that process for any one person. So I started sustainable recovery in 2008. And from there, I became more and more interested. I was working with the clients, primarily the identified patients, as people would call them, people who were in treatment. And then I hunkered back to that whole idea of why are we giving so much juice, or 90% of the juice, to the person struggling or experiencing addiction, and 10% to the family system, where necessarily that person is going to have to return. So I switched my focus to 100% on advocating for more support and services for the family system or anyone affected by the addictive behavior of someone in their life. It could be a boss, it could be anyone. And wanting to really focus on empowering them to be the most effective part of the solution that they could be, instead of just sending them to a family weekend, say at a residential treatment center, where they would get some psychoeducation, very important, but we needed more emphasis on transformation and ongoing support. And so that's what I've been advocating for a very long time now. We're in 2020, which is hard. I can't even fathom that. Time goes so fast. And so that's become my passion play, along with the ZERO Stigma thing. But what's important is that underneath all of these things is this notion of what is the protagonist in any one person's story that causes them to act in a way that is not healthy in relationship to another person. And that's everything in terms of ongoing healing and ongoing health from a physical standpoint, and a mental standpoint, a spiritual standpoint, emotional, all of that. So the notion in my practice, in my program, is how do we integrate a person in everything that they are, the experience they bring to bear, their childhood, everything that they've ever experienced accumulates right here, right now, wherever someone is. And we need to honor all of that and work with it in a way that empowers people, not disempowers them or makes them afraid. And so that whether I'm working with a person who's going to treatment, the family system, somebody who's graduated treatment and wants to go into the world and figure out what they want to do with their life, which is LaunchPad, which is the Discovering Your Purpose program, they're all related underneath to being self-motivated based on your values, not somebody else's value system, not somebody else's belief system, not somebody else's idea of who you should be, but just who you should be. One of my favorite sayings is, be yourself, everyone else is already taken. And how do you work with that based on what you've been through? Because you come to this necessarily pain point, cynical point, fear point. Very honestly, I always tell people, I said, wherever you are in the world at any time, you got there very honestly, and own that and honor that. And don't use it against you, but use it for you. And so when I sit with people, we really try to give life context, because context creates clarity, and clarity is power. And the more clarity that you have, the more you can use your natural, universal source, God source resources to create the life of your dreams, a healthy life, one that's full of usefulness and contentment. And you end up becoming skilled enough to navigate the bumps in the road, which we all have. That's never going to go away. In fact, they're important to our growth. So we don't want to try to create a life necessarily where we deny bumps or we reject bumps or, all of that. We learn to embrace them. We learn to not have them as rivals, but as partners in the process of life. And I had a coach tell me one time in a coaching session that I didn't give myself enough credit, and she wondered why. And I said, well, I'm not really sure, because it's hard to be objective. I need another person to help me. So she reflected back that you seem like you go through life working very hard, but never really appreciating what you do. And I said, well, wow, that's probably true, because I feel like I'm always busy and I'm always moving forward and never sort of stop and take stock of that. And she said, and you also seem like you're at odds with or in power struggle with your emotions. And I said, whoa, okay, yeah, that's pretty insightful. And she said, well, what emotion before we got on this call was something that you were dealing with? And I said, well, it was anger. And she said, well, look across from your desk and imagine anger sitting over there across from you. And I said, okay, I can do that. And she said, what I want you to do is look around your office. Is there another chair that you can pull over next to your desk chair? And I said, yeah, there was a card table chair. So I put it up next to me. And she said, now what I want you to do is I want you to invite anger, and I want you to tell anger to come sit next to you. And I was like, whoa, what is happening here? and I could feel myself getting excited, because it was all very intuitive. It was just something that needed to be brought up for me so that I could bring it to the forefront and use this resource to my event. So I did that, and I set it next to me, and she says, well, how do you feel now? And I said, wow, I'm a little uncomfortable, but I see where this is going. And she said, you can do that with everything that you are in a power struggle with in your life. You do not have to, you can disagree with people, or you can be upset with people, or you can be in challenging relationships with people, but that doesn't mean you have to be in a power struggle. You don't have to detach with them to the point where you're building walls instead of fences. You can be in relationship with people as you develop your own emotional awareness and your own emotional attunement, your own emotional skill set. You can be in relationship with anybody, especially people that aren't doing what you want them to do. And that really helped me, because relationships are about being with people who are not always going to be doing what you want them to do.
Well, and especially, I love that you transitioned to that, Tim, because, we are in such a world now today that you're either, for mask, you're not for mask. You're
with me or you're against me.
Yeah, you're Republican or you're Democrat. And it's like, who cares? Like, what happened to just connecting because they're the part of the human race and not trying to change their belief system, not saying I'm right, you're wrong, because we all have our own parts of who we are, and they're all lovely. And to go through life, my husband and I used to house leaders from all over the world, because I used to belong to a large church in Chicago, and they had global leadership summits, and they needed family members of the church to let the leader stay with them for free, because many of them couldn't afford hotels, but it just had enough money to come to the conference with airfare. And my husband and I had some amazing leaders from South Africa and Australia and Dominican. And the lovely part is we never knew who we were housing. They would just come. Wow. And we never knew their social economics. Many of them were pastors from different churches. We never knew if their church had 10 members or 25,000. And I remember the very first question, Tim, these leaders from all over the world would ask us is, so tell us about your president. They always wanted to know about politics. And I remember sharing with them that, I had a found love for whomever it was in office because they were the leader. And they looked at me and says, well, that's so profound. Like most people either hate them or give, and I said, no. I said, I'm just here to pray for whoever they are, and pray that our country is being protected, And they would look at me in astoundment, because they would be listening to just one media source in their country, and didn't know that there was people who were accepting of all. And so I've just got that kind of heart that I was raised in a family where none of us were included in the neighborhood. We were the family that was outcast. And so I think because of that burden, I've gone through life knowing and believing that everyone is loved. I just believe that. I believe in all inclusivity. I was in treatment for eating disorders 5 times. And my one treatment center I was in, I remember saying to the psychiatrist, after about the second session, I said, so Dr. Q, can you tell me, do you think I have like borderline personality disorder, or am I bipolar? What would you diagnose me? And he sat back like this and paused for about 2 minutes and said, Jill, I would say that you have unique personality disorder. There's no one like you. And I loved that answer because I felt like I needed a diagnosis to have an identity. And I loved how you talked about this sustainable recovery and who we are in our purpose, because we go through life thinking we need a title in order to heal. And do we need a title to get over what our illnesses are or our diseases are? Does it have to be titled? And I loved his response, because I am created uniquely. You're created uniquely. And if we've got issues, it's our unique disorder. No one else has it but us. And yet there might be others that have similar. Like I love the slogan in recovery, look for the similarities instead of the differences. And so, and what you shared, I loved what you shared about your anger chair, because I have found the best healing with internal family systems therapy, and to be compassionate and curious and creative with my parts that need to be unburdened, and to give them attention and love. And so for me, I've been able to find so much healing like you did with the anger, and not to tell anger to go away, but what I've done is I've taken my parts and I've put them on a beach. I love the beach, with lawn chairs. I line up lawn chairs and I give them sand pails and some suntan lotion. And so when I find a part like anger that needs attention, I graciously spend time with it. And then I ask it if it's willing to unblend for me and if it would like to sit on the beach and relax, because it's been working so hard in my life. And the parts feel so much graciousness, because when we go through life in busyness, in shame, in anger, in anxiety, and those parts overwhelm us, to be able to sit down like you did and put a chair and invite that part in and allow it to speak its truth, and then giving that part permission to relax and go to the beach and chill, take a nap, and then when and if you need it again, you can go to the beach anytime and say, hey, anger, I need you for about 20 minutes. Would you come and help me out? Like I'm pissed off right now. And then after it helps you out, you can say, you know what? Thanks a lot. Here's a bottled water. Go back to the beach and chill.
Yeah. I mean, I did a lot of work on myself. I felt like at the beginning of my recovery journey that this was about staying away from things or playing defense and not going here and not doing that and not being with them. And very restrictive, non-inclusive, and I'm a very inclusive person. I threw the greatest parties. That's why people came to my parties, because they were inclusive parties. They weren't exclusive. Everybody was there, the busboy and the rock star. And so the notion of connectivity and connection is very important to me and always has been, whether it was running in the background or in the foreground now, as my awareness has grown over my life and as I healed parts of myself and as I have engaged in processes of forgiveness and going through grief and having the human experience, and having it with a level of awareness that is not driven by the notion that life is unfair or there's some kind of conspiracy and that everything is a gift. There's a great teacher, and he talks about, you've really arrived when you're grateful for everything, not just the things that are good or wonderful or happiness or any of those. You embrace everything because you are made of everything. That's the point. The point is that we try to live a life that is too narrow. We get to be. We don't need to do anything. I got to make that clear. We get to be expansive. We get to live in awe and wonder. We get to not lose the eyes of a child. That notion of curiosity and exploration. This notion of always questioning. We've gotten into a rut where we don't question, where we just take in the information as gospel. You remember those commercials that were happening where somebody would say, well, where did you find that out? How do you know that's true? And it's like, well, I heard it on the internet. You know what I mean? So this notion of discernment, this notion of being skeptical, this notion of taking it one step further, the notion of trusting your gut and your intuition to know that there's something rotten in Denmark, that this isn't making sense and it's not adding up. And the notion of having this journey being organized around healthy connection, not just connection, but healthy connection, right? Because there is this notion of what is it to have a life that you are proud of, or that you are enjoying, that's joyful and you're flourishing. And to me, what I've discovered for myself in in recent past is it isn't about trying to figure out what makes you happy, but trying to figure out how you're connected to usefulness. And I had when I was on this trip with Wide Wonder, this trip that we did around the country where we were speaking about the addiction and mental health related stigma, I had recalled some memories when we were around Kansas and where I was born, about my grandmother and what she used to say to me when I was sort of moping around the house when I would hang out with her in the summers. And she would say, you can't just walk around waiting for other people to do something for you. You know, this whole boredom, I'm bored kind of thing, right? She said, well, why don't you make yourself useful? And and I would be like, okay. And she's like, why don't you make yourself useful and go pick some weeds, pull some weeds? And I'm like, come on, Grandma. I mean, like that's not going to make me happy. I'm not going to have fun. And these kinds of things that were like my filters for like what life was about. And I did it anyway. And I remember it was this sense of accomplishment, this sense of connection with my grandmother, because I did something for her. I was being useful with myself. I can be useful. And a byproduct of usefulness can certainly be happiness, but to put the cart before the horse is where we've gotten stuck in society. And I think that's the rub. The rub is that, why isn't this working out? Why am I not happy? And it's like, well, you've skipped a step. And the step is, how are you uniquely, you mentioned being unique, how are you uniquely useful as your person on this planet? What is that usefulness? Focus on that and let the byproducts of that allow yourself to say, oh, this is a good life. This is a life that I am proud of.
And when you shared that story, what came to me, the epiphany that came to me, as your grandma said about make yourself useful, I can envision too, Tim, you as a little boy sitting there afterwards and sitting back in the field and seeing the beauty after the weeds were pulled, that you can see the manifestation of the ground and the beauty after the plucking of the weeds. I wanted to transition for just a second here and then go into one question. When you had shared about your different positions or your ministry or companies, the one thing that hit me when you transitioned to the family that I'd love for you to address, I'm a firm believer, because of my own recovery, I'm a firm believer in people understanding what co-occurring addictions mean. Because people know, people may have heard of, oh, I'm a drug addict, or I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a sex addict, or I have an eating disorder. But many people that may not have been on recovery journeys understand the impact of a co-occurring addiction and how, I'm going to say my definition. A co-occurring addiction to me is, as you go into recovery, whatever it is you're recovering from, and you start to unpeel the onion of the emotions. Generally speaking, when you start to unpeel that onion, you'll find that there is another co-occurring addiction underneath it. So again, if you have substance abuse, many times what will happen, and this is where I have personally seen many recovery programs fail, is a person goes to treatment for drugs and alcohol, they're discharged, and the treatment center never addressed codependency, or they never addressed eating disorders, or whatever else was there. And so when you unpeel the onion and one person starts to get clean and sober, and you don't address other underlying issues, many times I believe that's the primary cause of relapse. And I've seen this so many times. My really good friend from the 70s who was a heroin addict, I remember her going to a restaurant with her 2 small children and her husband, and saying she was going to go to the bathroom. She went and made a phone call on a payphone to this guy she was having an affair with. He picked her up, and she left her husband and children sitting in a restaurant, because not only was she a heroin addict, but she had gotten in this codependent relationship with this lover. And so throughout those years, every time she'd go to treatment for her drugs and alcohol, within 5 to 6 days she'd relapse because she'd go back to her codependent boyfriend. And so she was never addressing that co-occurrent addiction of the codependency. And so as you were sharing the transition of working with the addict and the family, what came to me is, I believe many times the family is sometimes sicker than the addict, the codependent family that's trying to fix it and manage it and control the addict. They need healing in order for the addict to heal.
Yeah, so for me, the thought process is a little bit different, and that is that I don't really care to ask about why the addiction. I'm more interested in why the pain. Because the protagonist that drives somebody to be in a relationship with a painkiller, which isn't always drugs, by the way, drugs are not addiction. There is plenty of ways, behavior-wise, as well as substances, experiences that we can be in an unhealthy relationship with. And we know it's unhealthy because we persist in it despite negative consequences. But the notion of where I think we fail in treatment is that we don't address the protagonist. We don't focus on that. We focus on the behavior and symptoms. We arrest those. We stop the behavior. We arrest the symptoms, but we don't address the protagonist. We don't address the causes and conditions. And so that's an epic failure. And that's the notion of, like, if your premise is wrong, your conclusion's going to be wrong. So the premise that somehow it's a drug issue is the wrong premise. That's why we've spent $1 trillion on the war on drugs. That's a wrong premise. And so the conclusion has been a complete failure. So in any relationship with anything, person, place, or thing, we get to understand in context why we're having the relationship. What are the benefits? What are the costs? What is this relationship doing for me? What problem is it solving? What problem is it addressing? What issue is it addressing? Because we don't do anything. Human beings never do anything if there is not some sort of benefit. So addressing those, giving your life context, understanding that this is about what happened to you. It's not about what's wrong with you. We get to ask, what happened? What's your story? How did you get, because you weren't always in this relationship, but you have been in pain for a long time. And if you stop taking your painkillers, the notion of what do I do with all of this pain, physical or emotional, existential, whatever the heck it is, if that's not addressed, if I am not fully equipped and ready to go to war and battle with the notion of why this is occurring to me and what are my tools and what's my process, how do I, in a healthy way, address what is never going to go away 100%? Pain. Pain is always going to be with us. And in fact, that's one of our basic needs, is the relief of pain. That's why it's a basic need, because it's going to be a part of our basic life on some level. But it's how we do it. It's our why. Why? Why do I have this pain? Why do I choose to deal with it in this way? So if we, instead of trying to figure out the best way, we understand why we're experiencing this pain, why it's reoccurring, why it's co-occurring, right? Because if I come to you and I say that my wheels are out of alignment and this shop never looks at anything else, I can very much likely leave with a car in alignment, in the perfect alignment, drive down the road, and the car breaks. Mm-hmm. And I think to myself, well, how come you guys didn't do just a diagnostic and look up make sure that I'm safe to hit the road, not just that, my tires are in alignment or my wheels are in alignment. And so this notion of going, 10 miles deep, not just hanging up on the surface where the behavior and symptoms are, is where we get to change the narrative as far as how we treat people with issues around pain. Because, you said you came from a chaotic and dysfunctional family, and what family doesn't on some level? I always say life is a spectrum disorder. So you're somewhere on the spectrum around pain, around dysfunctional relationship, around not getting what you needed from your caregivers, your caretakers. We all experience that to some degree. And we get to put that in context and let's empower people, because if we're all having those experiences to some degree, not always with the same outcomes, but certainly to a certain degree, why are we not teaching ourselves how to navigate emotionally the space that we're occupying in relationship to other people, places, and things? Because that's always going to reflect back on us, Jill, how we're doing, how healthy we are. And that's really all that we can control, is how healthy I am.
And I think it takes us back what we started talking about with you with the anger in that chair, Tim, where, for me, again, going back to the times I was in treatment, several treatment centers would have you, and I just think it's so dysfunctional, in my opinion, not to judge the treatment centers, but the theory, would have you write a goodbye letter to your eating disorder. Well, when you're in treatment for an eating disorder, I'm like, you want me to write a goodbye letter to Ed? And I'm not ready yet to tell it to go F you. And so to write a
100%.
Yeah, and I'm like, no. And so, with Dick Schwartz creating internal family systems modality and working in the eating disorder community, I've come to recognize that I've embraced my eating disorder. I've embraced my drugs and alcohol, because they, for me, were my protectors and managers and my friend when I need,
and your teachers.
when I needed to know so I wouldn't commit suicide or, whatever. And so,
100%.
so to tell it to go away and not
Yeah.
protect me is so counterproductive. So I had to then
Agreed.
come to that eating disorder, thank it for being in my life, thank it, acknowledge it, ask it if it would give me some story around why it needed to be there, and then again put it in its little beach chair, thank restrictive avoidance disorder, thank binging, ask it to sit on the beach, and if I needed like a 10-minute binge, I might say, come and help me out, and still be in full recovery, but to know that those parts and those managers really kept me alive.
100%. Such a great point. I say the same thing in a different way, but absolutely agree with you. Nothing is wasted. I always tell people, again, wherever you are, you sitting on the beach, me sitting on the beach, wherever we are, we got here honestly. And it's important not to look back with such disdain or criticism about how we got to where we are, because it's all absolutely essential when you look at it from a bigger picture point of view. And that's part of this whole notion of getting skilled around self-compassion, getting skilled around how do I have a healthy relationship with self? Why do I treat myself with such disdain but to hold you in such high regard? That's a dysfunctional dynamic. In order for me to be healthy in any kind of relationship, I need to come at it with the notion that I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to be fixed. I just need to heal. I need to be whole, right? We talked about these different parts, and the notion of health is integration, right? Like, that's what we're talking about. I get to integrate dysfunction. We come from a culture that's like, gotta wipe my hands of that and move on. We're just gonna bury that and just keep on trudging, And the notion of that is not a healthy way. That's suppression, which leads to depression and all kinds of negative consequences. So the notion of integration is what we're talking about, like welcoming those parts of myself when I've been trying to deny them and kick them out and bury them and all of that and compartmentalize, is to integrate them so that I honor who I am. I'm a whole being, right? We're all wholly connected. We all come from stardust. And the notion of that connection is really the major part of the healing. And that I'm totally and 100% connected with whatever has happened to me, what my course of experience of my life. It's so deeply important in terms of how I function healthy right now today. And this talk with you and with my family and all my colleagues and everybody that I've ever, worked with and will work with. What do I bring to bear that is healthy and well-adjusted and joyful and because I have this relationship with my life, the wholeness of who I am. There's no part of it that I get to say was wrong or bad or wasted, because I can't be the most effective in relationship to you if I have those notions about myself.
Yeah, and Tim, and I'll just share this, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions. But my biggest epiphany for me as I started to go inside and be compassionate with these parts was I had this epiphany, and it may sound strange, but I think you'll be able to follow me. I had this epiphany, and I'm just going to get real transparent here, probably get a little blushy. But when you think about life, conception, and you have gorgeous children, and you think about that sperm meeting the egg and then forming inside the mother's womb. From the moment that conception takes place, inside that mother's womb, parts start to develop. That child inside the mother's wombs will start to have this part feeling of love, of nurture. And or if the mother is pregnant and has an maybe unwanted baby, that child starts to feel that part of not being wanted. So when you think about that conceptually, the parts come in at the moment of conception. And then if the baby's born through natural birth with birth canal, the doctor pulls that baby out of the womb and immediately spanks it. And the baby starts to feel anger and pain because this part comes in that hurts. And then the doctor cuts the umbilical cord, and the baby, for the first time, takes on the part of abandonment from the mother's womb in safety. So when you conceptually see that we were created and these parts come in, how can we sit back then and say they're bad? Like, how could you look at this perfectly innocent baby and say this part of anger or abandonment or fear or pain is bad? So when you can break it down all the way to the womb, embrace those parts, be curious of where they came from, unblend from them, what is left is true, authentic self. Because then you come back to what happened before these parts came in. You come back to that authentic self because you're able to keep unblending them so that you can stay in moments of authentic self. Because I don't think we're ever in true authentic self every single day. I mean, I just don't, because parts come in. I mean, unless we can sit there all day long and keep unblending, I'm going to unblend. So I've come to the realization at 66 years old that I'm gracious for moments of joy, because when I'm able to have those true authentic self evolve, I all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that was really joyful. And so I've come to understand this after like 38 years of intensive therapy. I've come now to evolve to going, this is the essence of healing. This is the essence of healing. So with that, Tim, I'd love to ask you, with this pandemic that, because sometimes we're powerless over, other times we're not, how have you been able to manifest connection in social distancing?
Well, I mean, definitely through social media. That's been a continual way of connecting with people, connecting with concepts, connecting with information. And connection is different levels as well. There's different levels of connection. There's different relational awareness is a big relational health is a big part of what I teach, and that is who is appropriate for certain kinds of information exchange and who is not appropriate. And so there's the appropriateness of connection around social media, and then there's the appropriate of connection around family members. And we do that intentionally through FaceTime. We have done some drive-bys where people will come by on their motorcycles and we'll stand 6 feet apart in our complex, and we will have these conversations. And those have been so important for us. And we're having family over today where we will continue to practice, safe relations, and have some lunch, and we'll sit where we're supposed to, and we'll wear proper masks for everyone, and we'll just continue to adapt. And I think that's one of the things that we get to remember here is that we are uniquely adaptable to our environments and to our relationships and to our situations, and that's what's on display here. Never before has this happened in our history to the extent it's happening on a global scale, where people have literally had to pivot all together at the same time. And it's a really interesting study because there are going to be some reverberations, of course, as we get on the other side. We're still in a COVID world. We're not in a post-COVID world by any stretch because there's no vaccine. So more is to be revealed and more is to be learned. But what I know is that we are resilient, that we have a lot of strength, that we should spend more time lifting each other up, and that we should spend more time in the media talking about what people are doing and how they're being successful as opposed to how they're failing. And I like things like Some Good News. John Krasinski from The Office has developed this YouTube series that every day or every week celebrates good news. And we need more of that in our society. We need a balanced delivery, fair and balanced delivery of what's going on in the world, because right now it's out of balance in terms of good news and not so good news. And I think when we get re-skilled and re-educated on how important that is and what that feels like, that'll be a good time in our society. That'll be a very seminal moment.
And we're all learning new stuff. I love the TV show Blacklist, and I watched the season finale last week, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'm probably going to blow it for you. But I mean, I love
No spoilers, because I love that show.
Have you watched it? Have you watched it?
Oh yeah, he's one of my favorite actors of all time.
Did you watch the season finale?
No, I haven't.
Okay, all I can share with you, because it won't ruin it, I don't think it will, is they were very creative because they must have started filming before the pandemic, and then they had to do some scenes to edit. And so they wanted to stay within the social distancing. So their creative team mirrored in real scenes with avatars.
Wow.
So they blended the avatars in with the real scenes. And I've just recently gotten into virtual reality with Sanzar on the platform with avatars, and doing business in Sanzar, a platform where you can do business meetings now with virtual reality and avatars. And this is going to be the thing of the future. We're doing
100%.
We're doing an expo in there. I'll share it with you when we go off. You might love it because it's a great platform for mental health, where people have anxiety of seeing faces like this, and they can go into a virtual reality group session in the avatar world. And so I've actually done that. Yeah, well, I'll talk more about that.
So cool.
Yeah, so with that, and we're here now coming to, believe it or not, 6 months into 2020. What are some of your dreams for the remainder of the year? What would be a dream that you would say? Maybe one or two dreams.
Yeah, so I think, I started the beginning of the year, 2020, what's your vision for this year? And this is the year for me of the hero. And the hero is a protector. And so what do I want to protect? And what I want to protect ongoing, this is not new, but for 2022, the year of the hero is to protect my family, to protect how we navigate this unique, extraordinary space in a way that's responsible, not reckless, and to put it into context and to constantly understand how we are strong and resilient. Always asset-based views, not just our deficits, but really focusing in our family conversations how this is making us stronger, how this is bringing us closer together, and how we want that to be a high value in our family. And that's 2020 and beyond, is to continue to promote this notion of the strength of a family.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because I did follow some of your journeys with Wide Wonder traveling, and it just touched my heart, the connection that you and your family had for that 12 months traveling around the globe. And I definitely would love to see a book out of that, because I know your wife is an amazing author, Robin.
Yeah, we're working on it.
To me, it'll be a #1 bestseller. I can't wait till it comes out. So, and if you guys don't know Robin Cruz, she's an amazing recovery guru for eating disorders, and I have to just say this: she's unbelievably gorgeous. You definitely married.
I noticed that.
The most beautiful woman. You really, and your daughters are out of this world gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, listen, she wrote this amazing book, and I went through the process with this book, and it's really, really, really worth looking at, whether you have an eating disorder or just have a challenging relationship with food. It's called Making Peace with Your Plate. Get it. It's a phenomenal book.
Yeah,
so
she's amazing.
I'm a big fan of Robin.
Meeting your wife at Eating Recovery Center in Colorado a couple years back, and with Jenny Schaefer, who's one of my favorite girls ever. I love Jenny.
One of Robin's best friends.
Yeah,
yep.
She's my girl too. I love Jenny.
Awesome.
So you know Jenny's busy when she can't pick up your phone because she's writing another book.
Writing another book. Yep.
Writing another book. And my last question to you that I'd like to ask is, when you can, when it's safe to travel again and you can do a getaway experience, what would that getaway experience look like now for you?
Well, as you know, and we've talked about a little bit, we traveled the country for 12 months from East Coast to West Coast, and then or West to East and back. And we have been talking about, I'd say probably almost since we got off the bus back in January, about where we would go back to. We asked that question of each other, and unanimously, it's the coast of Oregon. And so we want to go back and explore more awe and wonder of this beautiful coastline. We only got to see a little bit of it. And so we want to go back on the bus and go to the places that we didn't go and take the road of again, to be inspired by nature. The redwoods along the coast up there is unbelievably phenomenal. And that was besides Yellowstone, was probably the most impactful nature experience that we had, the coast of Oregon. So we want to do that. And we also, as part of this exploration, we want to go back to Portland. We met some incredible advocates for recovery and treatment, some incredibly passionate people in that part of the country. And they're really struggling around their homelessness, and they were and had been for a very long time. And so we want to go back and reconnect with those energetic fields of people who are as passionate and committed as we are to the prospect of zero stigma.
That's amazing. I lived in Portland for a year, so in my 70s I hitchhiked through those redwood forests, and I wish I could remember. I'm 66, so I was like 18 years old back then, and I wish I could remember. There was a spot that we went to that was amazing with waterfalls and hot springs, and it was and I don't remember where, but it was right off the coast there, and it was spectacular. So, and you
actually can do a tour, Jill, of the waterfalls just outside of Portland, just east of Portland, and we did that. So I know what you're talking about. Incredibly beautiful. And
then downtown Fountain, I remember the downtown Fountain, and I worked at the Paramount Northwest as an usher at concerts back then. And there used to be a little leather store right across from the fountain, and I worked at the leather store. I remember that.
I love it.
So I love Portland. Well, I do want you and Robin definitely, and since it's only 3 hours from Kansas, to definitely do an event with me in Branson. We got to do Branson. Yeah. We definitely have to do Branson.
Let's do Branson. I'm committed to doing that. I think that's awesome. Let's do it.
Well, I love being live with you during this. And my last question to the audience while we're live is, if someone told you had to get rid of all those apps on your cell phone and you only had 2 left, which would be your 2 must-have apps that you had to keep?
I think it would be, because I am incessantly curious and want to connect with other professionals, it would be LinkedIn. The other one would be Insight Timer, which is one of the most robust resources for ways of emotional regulation, like meditation and different classes and different educational workshops. And I've been on their site for a very long time. And what I like about them is that there's not only in-app purchases, but so many free resources for people to explore mindfulness, meditation, emotional health, which is really everything that's in my wheelhouse.
That's amazing. You'll have to email me that name, and when I post the video, I'll put that in for people so they'll find it. And then last but not least, what is Tim Harrington's fun fact? One fun fact about Tim. You only get one.
One fun fact I think people a lot of people don't know about me is that I was a roommate of Matthew Perry from Friends.
And of course, due to anonymity, you can't share some of those stories.
Oh my gosh. One of the most amazing times in my life. Never laughed so hard. Incredibly funny, magnanimous, generous, amazing person.
You know, that's what's difficult sometimes when you're in the recovery world and you sponsor somebody who's famous, because you know things and you can't reveal them because of the confidentiality. But I do remember living in San Diego and going to a party in San Diego with only about 10 people. And it's so sad to say, but Robin Williams was there. And it was just amazing to meet him and sit along when he was in his realm of his jokes and stuff. And so you never know who's going to be in your company. My son Jeremy loves to play poker. It's one of his favorite pastimes, not because he wants to make money, but he just enjoys it. And he's gotten real smart. What he'll do is when he does play, he goes to sleep at 8 o'clock at night and sets his alarm clock for around 2 or 3 in the morning. and shows up at the boats to play poker at 3 or 4 in the morning when everyone's drunk as a skunk. And then he can read them because he's sober. And so he shared one story that one day he's playing poker for about an hour and a half, and a guy across from him's got a hat on and sunglasses. And of course, you don't talk that much at the poker table. So about the time when they were both getting ready to leave, he got up and looked at him and said, "Are you Steve Martin?" He said, "Yeah." He goes, "I was in St. Louis for a banjo concert, and I'm just getting ready to go to the airport and catch my flight back to L.A." But it was so funny because he was incognito, and my son was like, "Are you Steve Martin?"
One of my heroes. Love Steve Martin. Love that guy.
Well, I'd like to leave with the audience seeing that Tim's bio on the screen here. It's got his different websites, and again, I will be posting this when I post the video, so if you don't catch it here, you will see it on the screen. And it's just been such an amazing time, Tim, to be with you. I've followed you, and we're on so many Facebook groups, and of course, meeting your lovely wife, and to spend this time with you today has been just amazing. So I wanted to end just with the audience to let them know that the Connection Show started just a couple weeks ago. And I've been reaching out to different leaders that I have affinities with to be on the show. And if you would like to be a part of the show, I will be posting braveheartworkshops.com's website where you can reach out to me on the contact page and we can set a time to interview you. But for you audience members, I don't want you to feel left out because you're not being interviewed. So what I've decided to do is move forward for you. And every Monday night now, we have chosen to start a new Zoom connection group called the Connection Gathering Tribe. And we meet Monday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 o'clock Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. It's an opportunity for you as an audience to join in, and some of our leaders occasionally will have an opportunity to join in too, and so you can connect with them more, you can connect with each other. Last Monday, we started off by just sharing a little bit what we do in life, and then after we realized, you know what, anytime you can sit around and talk about what you do for your job, but to really connect and be authentic, let's do life together. So what we did last Monday is we spent 40 minutes doing improv, and we had belly laughs like I haven't had in a very long time, and just had an amazing time. So please join us on Monday evenings for the Connection Gathering. And in order to join us, you'll need to go to our private Facebook page and enter your email so that I can send you a confidential, secure Zoom link to come into the show. So, Tim, it's been so wonderful talking with you today. Thank you so much for sharing. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jill.
And
thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. And we'll see you guys on Monday night on the Connection Show. Have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.
Let's connect now. We can dream together to renew, restore, and reconnect with wellness in our life. Go to braveheartworkshops.com. Join me for weekly Zoom connections on Facebook at facebook.com Braveheart Workshops. Thanks so much for joining the show, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday nights.